He has abandoned every single one of his palaces, not temporarily, not for a weekend trip or a state visit to another capital. Vladimir Putin, the man who spent 2 decades accumulating one of the most extraordinary collections of private residences on Earth, who built palatial estates in Moscow and the Novgorod Oblast as physical monuments to his own permanence and power, has stopped going to all of them for months. Every one of his known luxury residences stands empty, while Russia's president lives in a bunker in the Krasnodar region, emerging only when he has no choice, surrounded by a security apparatus so suffocating that his own cooks have their phones confiscated. The palaces are the tell. A man who still believed in his own invulnerability would still be sleeping in his own bed. A man still confident in his narrative of Russian strength would still be visible, accessible, projecting the image of a leader in command of events. Putin is underground because he has run the calculations and concluded that the surface is no longer safe. Not from Ukraine's drones, which can reach 2,000 kilometers into Russian territory and have already struck buildings 3 kilometers from his defense ministry, not from the assassins who have killed 2 senior Russian generals inside Moscow in the past 2 years with bomb attacks that required precise intelligence about their targets' movements, and not, most terrifyingly, from the forces gathering within his own political system that he cannot fully see or control. The strong man is in hiding, and the hiding is accelerating his collapse. In this video, we are going to look at exactly what the abandoned palaces reveal about the true state of Putin's grip on power, how the internal fractures, the crumbling approval ratings, the propagandists turning against him, the state pollster suppressing its own results, are creating the conditions for a crisis that no drone defense system can protect against. How Ukraine's assassination campaign and deep strike operations are compounding every internal weakness into something that looks increasingly like a late-stage regime in terminal decline, and why the security apparatus Putin has built to save himself may be the mechanism through which he finally loses everything. But first, let us look at the internal collapse, because the bunker is not primarily about drones. It is about what Russia's own people are starting to say about the man who put them there. 12 out of 14 weeks. That is how many of the 14 weeks leading into late April of 2026 have seen Putin's approval ratings fall. 12 declining weeks in 14. The 7th consecutive weekly drop. Numbers plunging at a pace not seen since 2018. When unpopular pension reforms briefly exposed the gap between Putin's projected invulnerability and the public's actual tolerance for his decisions. The context of 2018 matters. Russia's pension reform was a domestic economic issue, a policy change that affected retirement ages and provoked genuine popular anger. Putin survived it. He absorbed the hit, made cosmetic adjustments, and the numbers recovered. The approval drop was real but bounded. It had a ceiling and a floor. The current collapse is different. It is not driven by a single policy. It is driven by a growing, irreversible public awareness that the war Putin told Russians would last days has consumed 4 years, 1.3 million soldiers, and the security of Russian cities that now hear air raid sirens. That awareness cannot be reversed by a policy adjustment. There is no pension reform equivalent that makes the smoke over Moscow disappear, that uncloses the airports, that restores the military hardware to the Victory Day parade that Putin stripped away because he was afraid Ukraine would target it. The numbers are so bad that the state polling organization has stopped publishing them. On May 1st and again on May 4th, the results that were due to be released do not appear. The organization that has served for years as a legitimizing instrument, providing Putin with metrics of popular support that could be pointed to as evidence of democratic mandate, is apparently holding its own findings back. When the apparatus of legitimation refuses to publish the legitimizing numbers, the numbers are no longer performing legitimation. They are performing the opposite. But the approval rating crisis, alarming as it is not the most dangerous internal development Putin is facing. That distinction belongs to the voices that are turning against him from within his own information architecture. Russia's pro-war blogosphere, the network of Telegram channels and online commentators who have amplified Kremlin messaging, justified the invasion, boosted recruitment, and provided the ideological scaffolding for a war that could not survive honest public examination, is fracturing. One of its most prominent voices, a lawyer and reliable pro-Kremlin operator with 90,000 followers on Telegram, publishes an essay in March of 2026 with a title that would have been unimaginable from this source a year earlier. 5 reasons he has stopped supporting Vladimir Putin. He calls Putin illegitimate. He calls the war a failure. He says power has corrupted the Russian president beyond the possibility of recovery. Putin responds by having him committed to a psychiatric facility, the Soviet-era instrument for making inconvenient critics disappear without admitting they were imprisoned for their opinions. The man is released, he continues. The essay is still on Telegram, still circulating, still being read. Rybar, arguably the most influential of the Z bloggers, whose military commentary has shaped how Russia's pro-war constituency understands the conflict, begins calling Ukraine a dead end, not privately, on his channel. He accuses Russian battlefield commanders of concealing casualty figures from Moscow and officials of stealing the money meant to equip soldiers on the front. He is not hedging. He is saying, with the credibility of someone who has spent 4 years embedded in the pro-war information environment, that the war is being lost through mismanagement and that the people responsible for the mismanagement are lying to the person whose decisions determine everything. This is not dissent from the opposition. Russia's opposition has been in prison, in exile, or in graves for years. This is dissent from the infrastructure that has sustained Putin's war narrative. When the people who built the story start saying the story is false, the story is over, and the reason Putin is trying to shut down Telegram is written in these 2 cases. Telegram is where the cracks are visible. Closing it does not seal the cracks. It confirms them, intensifies public fury, and removes another instrument of the information control that has been fundamental to Putin's 26 years in power. He is destroying the tools he needs to survive in order to protect himself from what those tools are now saying about him. Now let us look at the external pressure that is compounding every internal weakness. Because Ukraine has not been idle while Russia's domestic architecture deteriorates. The drone escalation over the past 18 months is the military story that frames everything else. In August of 2024, Ukraine launches just over 1,000 long-range drones at Russian military targets in a single month. By March of 2026, that number reaches 7,000, nearly 7-fold growth in 18 months. Both Ukraine's Air Force and Russia's Defense Ministry confirm the figure. Ukraine is not merely matching Russia's long-range strike campaign, it has surpassed Russia's own peak monthly output and is directing it into Russian territory with a reach that extends 2,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. 2,000 kilometers. Air raid alerts are issued at that depth. Oil refineries at that distance burn. Military infrastructure that Russia relocated eastward to escape the original range of Ukrainian strikes is no longer safe at the new range. The narrative that Putin spent 3 years building, Russia is vast, Russia is deep, Ukraine's weapons will never reach anything that matters, is demolished by the geography of the alert map. Russia's own emergency services are the ones confirming it. Every air raid siren that sounds in a city that was previously considered untouchable is another crack in the foundation of the story Putin has been telling. On May 4th, 5 days before Russia's planned Victory Day parade, a Ukrainian drone penetrates Moscow's entire layered air defense network, the most densely defended airspace in Russia, and strikes the Mosfilm Tower in Moscow City. The impact point is 3 kilometers from Russia's defense ministry, in the heart of the Russian capital, within view of the buildings where Putin's war is being administered. Ukraine does not need to hit the defense ministry, it needs only to demonstrate that it could. The message reaches Putin in whatever bunker he is occupying that week. But the drones are not the only precision threat operating inside Russian borders. The assassination campaign running in parallel is, in some ways, more personally terrifying for Putin because it demonstrates a different kind of intelligence reach, the kind that requires knowing not just where a building is, but where a specific person will be at a specific time. In December of 2025, a car bomb kills Lieutenant General Fanil Sarvarov inside Moscow, a decorated senior military commander whose death requires that someone gain detailed knowledge of his vehicle, his schedule, and his movement pattern in a city saturated with surveillance. In 2024, Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov dies when a booby-trapped scooter explodes outside his Moscow apartment building. In February of 2026, the deputy head of Russian military intelligence is shot by an unknown assailant, a man whose professional life has been spent understanding and countering this exact type of threat does not see it coming. 3 senior military figures, 3 separate operations, all inside Moscow, all requiring the kind of precise intelligence about targets' movements and locations that should be impossible to collect in the Russian capital's security environment. For Putin, each of these operations delivers the same calculation. If they can find my generals in Moscow, they can find me. The only difference between Sarvarov and Putin is that Putin has more protection, more layers, more screening, more secrecy around his schedule. But each of these operations demonstrates that layers, screening, and secrecy are not absolute barriers. They are obstacles that can be overcome with sufficient intelligence. And the United States removing Iran's supreme leader in the opening hours of Operation Epic Fury, with bunker-busting precision in a country that thought it had adequately protected its leadership, tells Putin that even underground is not automatically safe if his adversaries know which underground. Here is where the security apparatus Putin has constructed to protect himself becomes the most revealing indicator of his actual situation. The Federal Protective Service now controls Putin's life in ways that have no precedent in his 26 years of rule. Everyone who approaches him is subjected to intensive FSO screening. Cooks, photographers, bodyguards, aides. All personal devices are confiscated and replaced with bunker-safe phones with no external connectivity. Putin's movements are managed, scheduled, and restricted to environments the FSO has fully vetted and controlled. The organization that was supposed to serve Putin's will now, in practice, constrains it. Security advisors, not the president himself, determine where he can go and when he can appear. The strongman has become the protected asset. His movements are no longer his own decisions. This is what analysts describe as typical of late-stage personalist regimes under perceived internal threat. The security apparatus expands its power to manage the vulnerability of the leader, and in doing so becomes itself a center of power that the leader must navigate rather than simply command. The FSO's interests and Putin's interests are not identical. The FSO survives Putin. The FSO knows it survives Putin. And an organization that is accumulating unprecedented authority during the final period of a deteriorating regime has reasons to think about what comes after that are not necessarily aligned with keeping the current leader in place indefinitely. The conspiratorially minded will say the FSO has every incentive to keep Putin frightened and isolated, because a frightened, isolated Putin gives the FSO more power than a confident, visible Putin ever would. Whether or not that calculation is active inside Russia's security services, it describes the structural dynamic accurately. The apparatus designed to protect Putin is also the apparatus most positioned to control what information reaches him, what options he perceives, and ultimately what decisions he makes about his own future. Add to this the reports of whispered coup. plotting among members of Russia's political elite, the belief circulating at levels senior enough that Putin himself is reportedly aware of it, that a faction within the Russian state is formulating plans to remove him, and the picture of a leader surrounded by threats from every direction becomes complete. From Ukraine's drones above, from Ukraine's operatives inside Moscow, from a public whose approval of him is collapsing, from former loyalists who are telling 90,000 followers why they stopped believing, from an FSO that has more power over his movements than he does, and from within the political elite itself. The body doubles that the former head of British intelligence confirms Putin uses are the final image. A man so afraid of being found in public that he sends substitutes to stand where he should be standing, to be seen by crowds who believe they are seeing their leader, to absorb the risk of visibility that Putin no longer accepts for himself. Putin built his 26-year rule on the projection of strength. Strength is visible. Strength appears in public. Strength does not send doubles to its own parades or abandon its own palaces to hide in a bunker. Russia's people can see this even through the state media filter. The closed airports, the stripped Victory Day parade, the air raid sirens in cities that were not supposed to be within range, the palaces standing empty, the polls that stopped being published, the telegram accounts of former loyalists saying the war is a dead end. Putin started this war to demonstrate that Russia could not be threatened, that Ukraine could not resist, and that he was the leader capable of restoring Russian greatness. 4 years later, he is underground, afraid of his own general's fate, sending body doubles to public appearances and watching the information architecture he spent 2 decades building turn against him in the platform he is trying to shut down. He built this war for a Russia that believed in him. He is hiding from the Russia it became. If you found value in this, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next.